The New York State Office of Addiction Services and Support, or OASAS, provides this podcast as a public service. Thoughts and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent or reflect those of the agency or state. This is Addiction, the Next Step.
Hello once again, everybody. Jerry Gretzinger here, your host of Addiction, the Next Step. And today, we're going to be talking about something that we have actually talked about before. It's an important topic and something that we always want to make sure that we have people understand the importance of, because it makes such a difference for so many people throughout the state of New York and really throughout the nation. And we're talking about peers and the services that peers can provide and how it is so critical and so important and makes such a difference. And today we're happy to be able to welcome a peer, someone who's working as a peer provider, and that happens to be Rudy Fernandez. Rudy is a certified peer advocate. He does that with second chance opportunities. Rudy, thanks so much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And, I said this, I like to stress it. It's so important, the work that you do and others like you do. So we're very appreciative of that. But let me first start. Every peer has a story of their own. And that's one of the things that makes them a peer, because they have a story and it's something they can share with those they work with. So let's start with your story, Rudy. Tell us about your background with addiction, with substance use disorder, and how then you brought yourself to the point you're at today.
So my name is Rudy Fernandez, as you introduced myself, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, which what it means to me is I haven't had a substance or drink since March 23rd, 2014.
That's great.
As a result of that, I am a husband, I'm a homeowner, I'm a certified peer advocate, I'm also a family navigator as well, and most importantly, I always like to start out this way, and I also pay taxes. I know it sounds crazy when people hear that all the time, but I always like to refrain that, because prior to me coming to recovery, I didn't know no better. I have 22 years of incarceration, 30 years of parole. My substance use did not, well, I want to say my main one, which is heroin, did not start out in the streets. It started out in prison, which I like to always state that, because incarceration does not equal rehabilitation. I started using heroin in downstate correctional facility 1994. Prior to that, I've been going to prison since I was 12 years old, and that's where it all started, because the system thought that, and I'm not hearing no conspiracy theory, I'm just saying that there's better ways nowadays. We have advanced that the system thought that they could rehabilitate a young kid, and instead they just turned me into a criminal, and what I mean by that is because it was a school of criminology. All I learned was to do those things, and I didn't have the support system that I have nowadays. But to backtrack from that, I was born into very well family. I was born here in the United States. I was raised in the Dominican Republic as a child. I went to school there and everything. English is my second language. And then I came over here to the United States, and I was missing some of the things that I was missing was I had everything going on for me, except, I didn't have that I love you from my mom, I'm assuming. So I was attracted to the streets when I came over here, and it just spiraled out of control. And through the years, things just drastically just went south and south and south. So when everybody wanted to be, a doctor or whatever the case profession or something, or profession, I just wanted to be a good criminal, And when I got the taste of heroin in the mix in 94 is when I really, how should I say this? Like I found my passion, like the passion that I have for recovery. I found that in heroin, because I didn't need the validation that I seek for in my mother.
Yeah.
I didn't need the validation that I seek for in my father. I didn't need the validation that I was getting from the gang members, because I was also a land king for like 20 years, So I didn't need those validations no more, because heroin filled that void that I had, that I was looking for all those years,
Yeah. Rudy, if you don't mind, let me just jump in really quick. So I know you've we've kind of moved quickly through your story to the point where I know you had discovered and started using heroin, but kind of take me back. You talked about, your childhood and feeling that you were missing a few things, in the family structure and such. What was that first time when you started using substances that kind of started you on the path, I guess, if you will?
So when the first substance that I used was marijuana, as they say, the gateway, right? And I thought it was, kids at my age was like actually starting to do it, or older kids, and I wanted to be part of something, And then when that went on for a few years until I found heroin. The horrors of addictions is very traumatic, but you don't see it as traumatic as you when you're in it, because it makes sense.
So,
for lack of a better word.
Yeah. So you went from marijuana, moved to heroin. You had some situations with the criminal justice system. Where were you? What happened when you made the decision? Because I've kind of a little familiar with your story. You made a decision, or a decision was sort of somewhat made for you, I guess, too. But to say that, okay, enough is enough. I want to start living a life without substances and move into recovery if I can. How did that play out?
All right. So the decision was made for me by a parole officer. My miracle came by a parole officer that decided that he did not want to put me, and this is in 2006, I believe. He did not want to send me to jail. He did not want to send me back to prison. And he decided that, look, you could do that easy. Can you give me 30 days at this facility? So, common sense, either a year and a half in a violation or 30 days. I was like, yeah, sure. Prior to that, although I was hooked on heroin, I never seen myself with a substance use problem because I lived in a criminal lifestyle, and I was always able, whenever I was out in the streets, I was always able to manage, robbing and stealing, do whatever I got to do. And that was part of my life. So I didn't see myself, because I was never homeless. I always had a place, with my sisters, my grandmother, and everything. I never considered myself homeless. So to me, a person with addiction is somebody that's eating out of a garbage can and sleeping under a bridge, right? Or those homeless that just eat, drinking wine all in the corner. That to me was the vision that I have of a person with a problem. And when I went to treatment for those 30 days, which 30 days turned out to be 9 months, by the way. But I went there for 30 days. I heard somebody share their story. There was a counselor there that shared his story. He was not even a counselor. He was he worked at the facility, and he happened to be sharing his story. And for the first time in my life, I was able to identify with somebody instead of comparing. I thought I didn't, because I was a criminal that used drugs.
I want to jump in here. So you're saying the person who you heard telling their story was a peer, right?
Well, no, he wasn't even a peer. Well, he was not. He was a peer, but he wasn't defined as a peer back then.
Right. Yeah. You may not have had that title, but you're sort of today hoping to do the same thing for others that this person did for you.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because for once, I was able to identify with the feelings. And I was like, wow, I've been going through the whole thing of my life. And that's where the seed was planted then. And I started mimicking what people in recovery was doing, because I didn't know, I heard about AA and NA, but that was not my thing. Like I said, I'm not an addict, and so I mimicked those things. And I did not know that at that time that, there was more to it than just, following, doing what they was doing. I had to literally surrender, which I did not know that, to get to where we at today, right? Not move all the way forward, but, I stood in the recovery process for about 11 months.
So there was a few different times when you said, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna stop using substances. I'm gonna move towards treatment and recovery, and you stumbled, and sometimes people do stumble along that journey, right?
Yes. I stumbled because, there was certain pieces that I was missing. But that stumble, I had another parole officer that I was blessed with that decided to, listen, I'm not going to send you to prison. Let me change your life. And that's literally how I got here. And this is where the journey actually begins. Because I could tell you about all the horror stories, but it is crucial to people to know that the horror stories is always the same. It's just different faces.
Yeah.
When I went back to treatment because of this parole officer, I realized that I never had a problem with drugs. I always had a problem the way I think. It was my thought process. Drugs is always going to exist. So, I ended up working on my belief and putting different things in my head, right? I realized that I was homeless all my life. I never knew the definition of homelessness, right? Until I got into a place where I was able to change my thought process. And I found out that my name was never on the lease. That was my grandmother's house. That was my sister's house. That was my aunt's house. So I always been homeless. So there was no difference between me and the guy sleeping under a bridge. So I always been homeless, and I didn't want to do that no more. Yeah. So I needed to remove the crimes and remove the drugs in order for me to be free. That's why I always say the peer in my life came in with my boss. Kelly, Ro, and Brian. Ro came into my life when I had 6 months. And to this day, you could ask her. We always talk about it. My first conversation with her, I had 6 months. And I told her, I am 39 years old. I'm a persistent felon. My life been ruined. I never had a job, never had nothing, which is why I talk about the taxes, And she just said, I never forget, I was on a phone call. I didn't even have my phone. It was a concentrated phone. And she just said, oh, no, your life just started. And I did not know what that meant, but something told me to believe her.
Yeah. And so I just want to point out for people, you talked about your bosses, and these are the folks at Second Chance Opportunities, correct?
Yeah, so Brian and Kelly are husband and wife, but they're the ones that started all this, and she is the executive director for Second Chance Opportunity.
Yep. And they're in Albany, correct? In Albany?
Correct, in Albany, 55 Goldman, where we have our own recovery coaches. We have 9 of them on by. We also have transportations. We can talk about that too, though.
Yeah, well, so, I do. I want to get into a little bit of that, just because it's amazing how fast time ticks away, right? When we're talking about stories that are so meaningful and have so much information to share. But you mentioned at one point, one of the things that had you stumble occasionally is because you were missing certain things, right? You didn't have a way to get to a job. You needed to have income, and you said, then I decided to rob my neighbor because you needed to have money, and then you wound up back in jail. So when we talk about things like Second Chance Opportunities and the work you're doing with them, the services that are available, I mean, it kind of fills some of those gaps that may exist for other people, like the opportunity to go to work, right? There's like work placement. You can find places to go to work. There's recovery housing. So you do feel that you have a home again. And so some of those gaps that you experience, these are the things that we're trying to make a little bit easier for people who are starting this journey today, right?
I want to say, I wouldn't want to say I was the first one in the housing, but this is where it started from, right? So, like, if you live what I live, you will see why I'm so grateful and I'm so passionate about this, right? So I did not have a niche for this yet at that time, but I believed in her. And she believed in me more than I believed in myself. See, I believed in her, I didn't believe in me, right? But this is where the peer came in at, right? She became that peer, and he became that peer, right? That was bringing jobs applications to me, helping me find a job, and because I was not able to get hired nowhere, they went out of their way and spoke to, the owner of Star Roofing. That was my first job, right? I never had a job, and then to go roofing, like, it was crazy, right? But they got me a job there, right? And I was so grateful because I never actually worked to earn the living. They got me in one of their first houses. They got me a room there, right? So I left treatment. I was in treatment 6 months past my graduation. I was in the vetting center where there was men and women, right? And I was 6 past my graduation because I was not able to get a job and I wasn't able to go to housing. I wanted something different. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to have my own house. I told you I didn't want to be homeless no more. And I wanted a job. It's just so hard for me to do it. But because I had them two in my side, doing all the footwork, I was able to accomplish that.
And Rudy, I think what you just said there, the fact that you had these two people who believed in you and wanted to help you achieve these things, that's what helped make this time when you did this, it made it stick, right? Because you had these people who were supporting you, believing in you, the housing, the work. And so what I want to, we need to wrap up in a couple of minutes here, but I think anybody can take away from your story here is that, yeah, there will be times when somebody is starting to think, you know what, I need to make some changes. It's going to be a struggle, but there are people, and there are people like yourselves, the folks at Second Chance Opportunities, certainly at OASAS all across New York State, who are out here to be able to, to take you by the hand or walk, side by side with you to make sure you get where you want to go. And what you're sharing with us is a terrific example of that. And on top of that, the fact that there are peers such as yourself who can say, I've been there, I've done it.
Right. So how I got here, she invited me to a Fort Albany meeting, and I went there and I said, oh my God, this is because I remember what they did, how I felt when Brian and Kelly did for me. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to advocate for my people, the people that are still struggling, that don't know that there's a better way. Like we hear about meetings and other stuff, but you need support, right? You need support. You can't do this alone.
Right.
So I was like, this is and that's how I got into this, But she would not let me do anything until I had 2 years, right? Because I needed to build a foundation. I needed to build my own foundation before I could start helping people. Yeah. So it's self-care before anything, right? And then after that, with OASAS and for Albany and everything else, we just started the movement, and her vision was always to have our own recovery center, based on what we need here in the community, right? Yeah. So at that time, it was just 2 houses, and then we expanded, and then COVID did a blessing for us. See, from every tragedy, there's always an opportunity.
Right.
Right? So she took the opportunity to remove the college kids that she didn't remove them, but they removed themselves on their own because of the rent and everything. And she turned every single one of them houses that it had, into recovery houses little by little. And now, so I'm also the housing director because I lived in the housing for 5.5 years.
Yeah.
And I went from there, from a room to renting a whole apartment to having a girlfriend that then ended up marrying her and buying my own house in 5.5 years.
Oh, that's great. Congrats. That's awesome. Good for you.
Yes. And now I oversee 16 houses. So I oversee the houses and I work with the individuals that are there. And then they also have their own recovery coaches here. So they get double the whammy, to actually help them move forward. See, we meet people here at Second Chances where they're at. We're just not trying to leave them with.
Rudy, I'm hoping that people are hearing your story about, the early years when you said you started, experimenting with marijuana, moved on to heroin, and, the run-ins with the criminal justice system and just all that it took to get you to the point where you were finally ready and capable to go through treatment and enter recovery, and that here you are, married, homeowner, paying taxes, like you said, and doing all these things that you always knew you wanted to do. You've been able to achieve that, and hopefully you're able to continue to achieve all that you want. And I really do hope that people hear this story and reach out either to you directly, or they can go to our website, oasas.ny.gov, oasas.ny.gov. There's also the Hope Line, 877-8-HOPE-NY. These are all places where you can get connected with people like Rudy, with services like Second Chance Opportunities, and so many other options like that across the state of New York. Rudy, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and helping to hopefully show the light to people that is definitely out there.
Thank you.
All right. And we'll have to have you back again because I feel like we could probably talk about so much more and touch so many more lives. So we'll be sure to do that.
Oh,
Rudy,
yeah.
thank you again. And hey, listen, thanks everybody for checking us out here on Addiction the Next Step. I'm Jerry Gretzinger, your host. We'll look forward to having you join us again in the future. Until then, be well.